When my ex-husband stood up in that courtroom and told the judge I was unfit to be a mother, I thought my world was ending. But then the judge asked me one question that changed everything. Is your maiden name Coleman? What happened next will give you chills. Standing there in that sterile courtroom, watching Colton's smug expression as his lawyer nodded in agreement, I felt my knees go weak. This was it. This was the moment I was going to lose my daughter forever. The judge's gavel might as well have been a hammer about to shatter my entire world into pieces. My name is Kenna Coleman Vaughn, and I'm a 34-year-old pediatric nurse who had been fighting the battle of my life for 8 months. Not against cancer, not against some rare disease, but against my own ex-husband, who wanted to take away the most precious thing in my world, my 8-year-old daughter, Brielle. Brielle isn't just my daughter. She's my best friend, my reason for getting up every morning, and the little girl who still crawls into my bed during thunderstorms. She's the kid who saves her allowance to buy me flowers when I've had a rough day at the hospital, and who tells me I'm the best mommy in the world even when I'm running on 3 hours of sleep after a double shift. I'd spent every penny I had on legal fees, worked extra shifts until my feet bled in my shoes, and cried myself to sleep more nights than I care to admit. All because my ex-husband decided that destroying me was more important than what was best for our child. He had money, he had connections, and he had a legal team that made me feel like David facing Goliath, except I wasn't sure I had any stones left to throw. That Tuesday morning in Judge Delaney Hartwell's courtroom felt like walking into my own execution. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the wooden benches too hard, and the air too thick with the weight of other people's broken families. I sat there in my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought 3 years ago for job interviews, trying to look like the stable, capable mother I knew I was, while inside I was falling apart. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on them. My lawyer, Melanie Frost, was doing her best, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She'd warned me that Colton's team was ruthless, that they'd found ways to twist every aspect of my life into evidence against me. Working extra shifts to pay for legal fees became neglecting my child. Living in a modest apartment became providing an unstable environment. Even my dedication to my patients at the children's hospital was somehow being used against me. Colton Vaughn, my ex-husband, sat across the courtroom looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfectly pressed suit, confident posture, that same charming smile that had fooled me for 10 years of marriage. Next to him sat Harrison Blackwood, his attorney, a man whose reputation for destroying opposing parties was legendary in our small city. They looked like they'd already won, like this was just a formality before they took my daughter away from me. My parents, Wesley and Paige Coleman, had flown in from Oregon, spending money they didn't have to be there for me. My dad kept clenching and unclenching his fists, wanting to protect his little girl but powerless in this legal battlefield. My mom held tissues in her purse, ready for the tears she was sure would come. My sister Tegan had been texting me encouragement all morning, but even her usual optimism couldn't penetrate the dread that had settled in my chest like a stone. The hardest part was knowing that Brielle was at school, probably sitting in her 3rd grade classroom, completely unaware that her entire future was being decided by strangers in suits. She'd hugged me extra tight that morning, sensing something was wrong even though I'd tried to act normal. "Mommy, you look pretty today," she'd said, straightening my necklace with her small fingers. If only she knew that her mommy was about to fight the most important battle of both their lives. 10 years earlier, I had married Colton believing I'd found my fairy tale. He was charming, successful, and seemed to want the same things I did. A family, a home filled with laughter, children who would grow up feeling loved and secure. For the first few years, it felt like we were building something beautiful together. But fairy tales don't prepare you for what happens when the person you love starts to change, or maybe shows you who they really were all along. Colton's charm turned into control. His success became more important than our family. When Brielle was born, instead of bringing us closer together, she became another source of tension between us. I threw myself into being the best mother I could be while working as a pediatric nurse at Children's Memorial Hospital. I loved my job. There's something magical about helping sick children get better, about being the person who holds their hand when they're scared, who makes them laugh when they're hurting. But Colton saw my dedication as a threat to his image of the perfect corporate wife. The cracks in our marriage started small. He'd complain when I had to work late shifts. He'd make snide comments about my salary compared to his. He started questioning every decision I made about Brielle, undermining me in front of her, making me second-guess myself as a mother. Why did you let her eat that? Why isn't she in bed yet? Why can't you manage your schedule better? The questions never stopped, and neither did the criticism. When Brielle turned 6, things got worse. Colton started working later, traveling more, and when he was home, he was distant and irritable. He'd come home from business trips with expensive gifts for Brielle but barely acknowledge me. He'd take her to fancy restaurants and tell her how lucky she was to have a daddy who could afford nice things, while giving me pointed looks that said everything about what he thought I couldn't provide. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night last year. I'd worked a 14-hour shift because 2 nurses had called in sick, and we had a little boy who'd been in a car accident fighting for his life. I got home at midnight to find Colton waiting for me in the kitchen, arms crossed, furious. Brielle had a school project due tomorrow. She's been crying for 2 hours because her mommy wasn't here to help her. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I ran upstairs to find Brielle asleep at her desk, tears dried on her cheeks, a half-finished poster about butterflies spread out in front of her. I finished it myself, staying up until 3 in the morning, cutting out pictures and writing in my neatest handwriting about monarch migration patterns. That's when I realized our marriage wasn't just broken. It was toxic. Colton wasn't just absent. He was actively working to make me feel like a failure as a mother. Every missed school event because of my work schedule became ammunition. Every tired morning when I forgot to pack Brielle's lunch became evidence that I couldn't handle my responsibilities. When I finally asked for a divorce 8 months ago, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. Colton didn't just want out of our marriage. He wanted to destroy me. Within a week of me filing the papers, he'd hired Harrison Blackwood and begun documenting every single thing I did as a mother. He installed cameras in our house before I moved out, recorded our conversations, and started building a case that would paint me as unfit. The morning of the custody hearing, I sat in my car outside the courthouse for 20 minutes, unable to make myself walk through those doors. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get my lipstick on straight. Brielle had asked me at breakfast, "Mommy, will I still live with you after today?" I'd forced a smile and promised her yes, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. My lawyer, Melanie Frost, met me at the courthouse steps. She was kind and competent, but she was also overworked and underpaid, handling public defense cases because that's all I could afford. "Kenna, I'm not going to lie to you," she said, her voice gentle but honest. "Colton's team has resources we don't have. They've built a strong case, but we have something they don't: the truth about who you are as a mother." My parents had flown in from Oregon, my dad taking time off from his job at the lumber mill, my mom using vacation days from the elementary school where she worked as a secretary. They sat behind me in the courtroom, solid and supportive, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They'd raised me to be strong, to fight for what was right, but this felt like a battle I was destined to lose. My sister Tegan had wanted to come, but someone had to stay home with her own kids. She'd been texting me encouragement all morning. "You're the strongest person I know, Kenna. Brielle knows who her real parent is. That judge is going to see it too." But sitting there in that courtroom, watching Colton's confident smirk and Harrison Blackwood's expensive suit, I felt anything but strong. I felt like David facing Goliath, except I wasn't sure I had any stones left to throw. When Harrison Blackwood called Colton to the stand, I watched my ex-husband transform into the perfect witness. Gone was the man who used to throw dishes when dinner wasn't ready on time, who would give me the silent treatment for days when I disagreed with him. In his place sat a concerned father, speaking in measured, reasonable tones about his worry for our daughter's well-being. "Your Honor," Colton began, his voice steady and convincing, "I didn't want it to come to this. I've tried to work with Kenna, but her behavior has become increasingly erratic since our separation." I felt my stomach drop as he continued. He painted a picture of me as an absent mother, working double shifts, not out of necessity, but out of some misguided sense of martyrdom. According to Colton, I chose work over my daughter, leaving Brielle with babysitters and neighbors while I pursued my nursing obsession at the expense of our family. She's never home, Your Honor. Brielle comes to my house on weekends crying because her mother missed another school event, another parent-teacher conference. The child is suffering because Kenna refuses to prioritize her own daughter. Every word felt like a physical blow. He twisted every sacrifice I'd made, every extra shift I'd worked to pay for this very legal battle, into evidence of my inadequacy as a mother. When he mentioned finding Brielle doing homework alone at 10 o'clock at night because I was working late, I wanted to scream that I'd been saving a 7-year-old's life that night, that I'd held that little boy's hand while surgeons worked to repair his damaged organs. But Harrison Blackwood wasn't finished. He stood up, straightening his tie, and delivered the killing blow with surgical precision. Mr. Vaughn, in your opinion, is your ex-wife mentally and emotionally stable enough to provide proper care for your daughter? Colton paused for effect, looking directly at me with what appeared to be genuine concern. Your Honor, I love Kenna. I always will, but she's been living in denial about her limitations as a single mother. She's exhausted, financially unstable, and frankly, I'm worried about Brielle's safety in her care. The lies came so smoothly, wrapped in such reasonable language, that for a moment I almost believed them myself. He talked about my erratic work schedule, as if I were some kind of party girl, instead of a nurse trying to keep the lights on. He mentioned my modest living situation, as if loving my daughter in a 2-bedroom apartment was somehow child abuse. Then came the moment that nearly destroyed me. Harrison Blackwood leaned forward and asked, Mr. Vaughn, do you believe your ex-wife has been truthful with this court about her ability to provide for your daughter? Colton looked straight at Judge Hartwell, his expression grave and sorrowful. Your Honor, Kenna has always been a liar. She lied about wanting children when we first got married, saying she wasn't ready when I brought up starting a family. She lied about her commitment to our marriage, working longer and longer hours to avoid dealing with our problems. And now she's lying about being able to provide for Brielle. She can't even afford a decent lawyer. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. I felt my face burn with humiliation as every person in that room absorbed Colton's words. My parents sat behind me, and I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath. Even my own lawyer looked stunned by the calculated cruelty of his testimony. Harrison Blackwood nodded approvingly and turned to face Judge Hartwell directly. Your Honor, Mrs. Vaughn has no credibility. The evidence shows a clear pattern of deception and instability. She works excessive hours, lives in substandard housing, and has demonstrated a consistent inability to put her daughter's needs first. My client can provide Brielle with security, consistency, and most importantly, honesty, something her mother apparently cannot. I watched Judge Delaney Hartwell taking notes, her expression unreadable. She was a stern woman in her 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. I'd researched her before the hearing and knew she had a reputation for being fair but tough. Right now, she looked like a woman who'd heard enough broken promises and false claims to last a lifetime. The worst part was that some of what they were saying contained grains of truth. I did work long hours. I was struggling financially. I was exhausted most of the time. But they were taking my efforts to be a good mother and provider and twisting them into evidence that I was a bad one. When it was my turn to cross-examine Colton, Melanie did her best, but I could see we were fighting an uphill battle. Every question she asked seemed to give him another opportunity to paint himself as the stable, reliable parent and me as the chaotic, unreliable one. Sitting there watching my ex-husband systematically dismantle my character, I felt like I was watching my daughter slip away from me one lie at a time. The man I'd once loved was destroying me with surgical precision, and there seemed to be nothing I could do to stop it. I was David facing Goliath, and I was running out of stones. When Melanie called me to the stand, my legs felt like they might give out beneath me. I'd watched Colton's performance, seen how easily he'd convinced the room that I was an unfit mother, and I knew I had to do something different. All the legal strategies we'd practiced, all the careful answers we'd rehearsed, suddenly felt hollow and scripted. As I walked to the witness stand, I caught sight of my parents. My dad gave me the smallest nod, the same one he'd given me when I was 8 years old and afraid to get up on stage for my first school play. My mom pressed her hand to her heart, a gesture that meant, "Speak from here, not from your head." I decided in that moment to throw out everything Melanie and I had planned. If I was going down, I was going down telling the truth about who I really was, not reciting some sanitized version designed to sound good in court. Your Honor, I began, my voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. Everything Colton said about me working long hours is true. I do work double shifts sometimes. I do come home exhausted. But what he didn't tell you is why. I looked directly at Judge Hartwell, ignoring Harrison Blackwood's disapproving frown. 8 months ago, when I filed for divorce, I had exactly $437 in my personal checking account. Colton had controlled our finances for our entire marriage. I had a joint account I couldn't access and credit cards he could cancel at any time. So yes, I work extra shifts. I work them because every hour I'm at that hospital is another hour I can prove I can support my daughter. The words started pouring out, and I couldn't stop them. I work extra shifts because legal fees cost money I don't have. I work them because I'd rather be exhausted than lose Betrayal. And I work them because I love what I do. I'm a pediatric nurse, Your Honor. I spend my days taking care of other people's children who are fighting for their lives. I could see Melanie looking nervous, probably worried I was going off script, but I pressed on. Colton says, I'm never home. But what he doesn't mention is that when I am home, I'm completely present. I read to Betrayal every single night, even when I've been on my feet for 14 hours. We have pancake Sundays where she helps me flip them and tells me about her week. I braid her hair every morning before school while she practices her spelling words. My voice cracked slightly, but I kept going. He says I live in a modest apartment like it's a crime. You know what's in that modest apartment? Artwork Betrayal made covering every inch of the refrigerator, a reading corner where we curl up together every evening, a kitchen table where she does her homework while I cook dinner, asking me questions about everything from fractions to why the sky is blue. I turned slightly to look at Colton, and for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of him. Colton says I lied about wanting children. The truth is, I was 24 when we got married and terrified I wouldn't be a good mother. But when Betrayal was born, she became my whole world. Every decision I've made since then has been about giving her the best life I possibly can. Judge Hartwell was still taking notes, but I thought I saw something shift in her expression. I decided to address the elephant in the room head on. Your Honor, Colton's lawyer is right about one thing. I can't afford the kind of legal representation he has. But you know what I can afford? I can afford to be present for my daughter. I can afford to know that her favorite color is purple because it reminds her of butterflies. I can afford to know that she's afraid of thunderstorms but brave enough to pet the neighbor's big dog. I can afford to be the mother who shows up. I felt tears threatening, but I blinked them back. Colton can give Betrayal things I can't. He can give her a bigger house, fancier clothes, expensive vacations. But I give her something he never has. I give her my complete attention when I'm with her. I give her consistency in the ways that matter. And I give her a mother who would fight heaven and earth to protect her. My voice grew stronger as I reached my conclusion. Your Honor, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes every single day. But I love my daughter with every fiber of my being, and she knows it. When she's scared, she calls for me. When she's proud of something, I'm the first person she wants to tell. When she needs comfort, she crawls into my bed, not his. I looked directly at Judge Hartwell one final time. Colton says I'm a liar, but here's the truth. I'm a mother. And everything I do, every choice I make, every sacrifice I've made over the past 8 months has been to make sure I get to keep being her mother. That's not a lie. That's love. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally said everything I needed to say. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Judge Hartwell had been reviewing her notes for what felt like an eternity, and I was certain she was preparing to deliver the verdict that would shatter my world. My testimony had felt powerful in the moment, but now, sitting in the suffocating silence, I wondered if speaking from my heart had been enough, or if Colton's calculated performance had already sealed my fate. Harrison Blackwood was shuffling through papers with the confidence of a man who knew he'd won. Colton sat back in his chair, that familiar, smug expression creeping across his face. Even Melanie looked defeated, Her shoulders slumped as she stared at her legal pad filled with notes that suddenly seemed inadequate against the opposition's war machine. My parents sat behind me, and I could feel their love and support, but also their helplessness. My dad had spent his whole life fixing things with his hands. Broken pipes, damaged roofs, anything mechanical that needed repair. But he couldn't fix this. My mom had always been able to kiss away my hurts and make everything better with homemade cookies and warm hugs. But this was beyond even her powers. Judge Hartwell finally looked up from her notes, and I braced myself for the words that would change everything. But instead of delivering her verdict, she did something completely unexpected. She looked directly at me, her stern expression softening slightly, and asked, "Mrs. Vaughn, is your maiden name Coleman?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I blinked, confused and disoriented. Of all the things I'd expected her to ask, this wasn't even on the list. "Yes, Your Honor," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. 10 years ago, were you working at Children's Memorial Hospital?" she continued, and something in her tone had changed completely. The stern judge was still there, but underneath was something else, something that sounded almost like recognition. "Yes, Your Honor, I was," I replied, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the courtroom could hear it. I glanced at Melanie, who looked as confused as I felt. Even Harrison Blackwood had stopped shuffling his papers and was staring at the bench with a frown. Judge Hartwell set down her pen and leaned forward slightly. When she spoke again, her voice carried an emotion I couldn't identify. "You saved my daughter's life." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I felt the blood drain from my face as my mind raced backward 10 years, searching through hundreds of patients, thousands of moments trying to understand what she meant. My daughter, Lyrica, was brought into the emergency room on a Tuesday night in March, Judge Hartwell continued, her professional composure beginning to crack. She was 7 years old and she had pneumonia that had progressed to sepsis. The doctors told my husband and me to prepare for the worst. They said it was touch and go, that the next 72 hours would determine whether our little girl would live or die. My breath caught in my throat as the memory suddenly crashed over me like a wave. Lyrica, a little girl with dark curls and huge brown eyes, so sick she could barely keep them open. I remembered her mother, a woman who never left her side, who held her hand and whispered encouragement even when the child was too sick to respond. I remembered her father, a tall man who paced the halls looking lost and terrified. But there was one nurse, Judge Hartwell continued, her voice growing stronger, who stayed with Lyrica through 3 straight shifts, who held her hand when she was scared, who sang to her when she couldn't sleep, who made sure she got every medication exactly on time, who treated my dying child like she was her own daughter. I felt tears streaming down my face as the full memory came flooding back. Lyrica had been so tiny in that hospital bed, fighting an infection that was trying to steal her life. I'd been assigned to other patients, but something about her had grabbed hold of my heart and wouldn't let go. I'd stayed past my shifts, ignored my supervisor's warnings about overtime, and refused to leave her side during the worst of it. That nurse was Sarah Coleman, Judge Hartwell said, using my maiden name. And when Lyrica finally turned the corner, when her fever broke and she opened her eyes and asked for water, that nurse cried harder than I did. I remembered that moment perfectly. The relief, the joy, the overwhelming gratitude that this beautiful little girl was going to be okay. I'd hugged her parents, and her mother had whispered, "Thank you," over and over while her father shook my hand with tears in his eyes. Judge Hartwell looked directly at Harrison Blackwood, her voice regaining its judicial authority but carrying an edge of steel I hadn't heard before. "You didn't just do your job that week, Mrs. Vaughn. You treated my child like she was your own. And now, Mr. Blackwood wants me to believe you can't be trusted with your own daughter?" The gavel came down with a sound that echoed through my soul. "The court awards primary custody to Mrs. Kenna Coleman Vaughn," Judge Hartwell announced, her voice firm and final. "Mr. Vaughn will be granted supervised visitation every other weekend, pending successful completion of co-parenting classes." I collapsed into Melanie's arms, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. 10 months of fear, exhaustion, and heartbreak poured out of me in that moment. Behind me, I heard my mother crying and my father's quiet, "Thank God," whispered under his breath. Melanie was hugging me tight, whispering, we did it," over and over. Across the courtroom, Colton sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Harrison Blackwood was already packing his briefcase, his expensive strategy crumbling around him like a house of cards. For once in his life, Colton's money and connections hadn't been enough to buy him what he wanted. Judge Hartwell continued speaking, but her words felt like they were coming from underwater. Something about character being more important than bank accounts, about the court's confidence in my ability to provide a loving, stable home for Brielle. But all I could think about was that little girl sitting in her third-grade classroom, completely unaware that her world had just been secured. As we left the courthouse, my parents flanked me like bodyguards, my dad's arm around my shoulders, my mom clutching my hand like she'd never let go. Melanie walked beside us, grinning wider than I'd ever seen her grin. "Kenna," she said, "in 20 years of family law, I've never seen anything like that. The universe was looking out for you today." But I knew it wasn't the universe. It was kindness. It was the choice I'd made 10 years ago to stay by a scared little girl's bedside when I could have gone home. It was every extra shift I'd worked, not just recently to pay legal bills, but throughout my career, because I couldn't bear to leave when a child needed me. I picked up Brielle from school that afternoon, with the custody papers in my purse and my heart so full it felt like it might burst. She came running toward me the way she always did, her backpack bouncing behind her, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Mommy," she called out, launching herself into my arms. "Did you win?" I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the lingering smell of school cafeteria pizza. "No, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "We won." That night, as I tucked Brielle into her bed in our modest apartment, she looked up at me with those serious 8-year-old eyes and asked, "Mommy, are you going to cry happy tears again?" I laughed, wiping away tears I didn't even realize had started falling. "Probably, baby. I might cry happy tears for a very long time." "That's okay," she said, patting my cheek with her small hand. "I like your happy tears better than your sad ones." As I sat in her room watching her fall asleep, I thought about Judge Hartwell's daughter, Lyrica, who would be 17 now. I wondered if she remembered the nurse who'd held her hand during the scariest week of her young life. I hoped she was healthy and happy, surrounded by people who loved her the way every child deserves to be loved. The truth is, that day in court taught me something I'll never forget. Your reputation isn't built in boardrooms or courtrooms or bank accounts. It's built in the quiet moments when nobody's watching, in the extra effort you give when you're exhausted, in the love you show to people who might never be able to repay you. 10 years ago, I made a choice to care for someone else's child as if she were my own. I had no idea that choice would one day save my own family. But kindness has a way of traveling through time, of coming back to you when you need it most, often in ways you never could have imagined. Colton was wrong about one thing. I'm not a liar. I'm a mother who believes that love is stronger than money, that character matters more than credentials, and that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can change everything. Today, Brielle is 9 years old and she still crawls into my bed during thunderstorms. She still helps me make pancakes on Sunday mornings, and she still tells me I'm the best mommy in the world. The difference is, now I believe her. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear that good things really do happen to good people. Comment below and tell me about a time when kindness came back to you when you needed it most. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that prove love always wins in the end.